You have the honor and distinction of being the first millennial elected to the state assembly. Now you're 40, running for governor, father of small kids. Tell me about that. How's life going for you?
It's exhausting. So we drove up north on Tuesday, my wife and our 4 kids. Our kids are 8, 7, 5, and 4, so we got to drive up on Tuesday, and we've been bouncing around along Northern California. We've been in Sacramento, we've been out in the Bay Area, we've been out to the coast, out in Santa Cruz, and it's been amazing. But yeah, I mean, we're having a great time, and I feel for my wife right now because she's stuck in a hotel room with all four of the kids. I think I've only gotten 3 send help texts from her. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I feel very passionate about. This is something that is extremely important to me because everything that is the most important thing in the world to me is tied to the future of this state and tied to the next governor. You know, my kids are everything to me. My family is everything to me. As you mentioned, I was the first millennial ever elected to the state legislature. I got elected just after turning 27 years old. And then
you can applaud.
Yeah. And then in 2016, I became the youngest majority leader in the history of the state. And I loved what I did. I loved my job. I loved being able to work on all the issues that I was able to work on. I loved being able to craft policies that would become national models in terms of what happens to your online information after you pass away or you lose a loved one. And keeping jobs in the state by re-upping and modernizing our film tax credit legislation. And as much as I loved what I did, because I was young when I got elected, I had a lot of major life milestones happen. So I got engaged, and then I got married. We had 3 of our 4 kids while I was in the legislature, and as much as I was at the height of my power and the height of my influence, and I had a lot of people telling me, Ian, you could run statewide, you can be a member of Congress, you could go. I made a decision that nobody makes in my position, and I decided to leave. I had 4 years left that I could serve, but I knew that I was going to miss moments with my family, with my kids that I would never get back. And so I gave up my power, I gave up my influence to go and be a dad. And I've been a small business owner for the last almost 6 years, and I've been enjoying being able to take my kids to school in the morning and pick them up from school and being with my wife and living our life. But because of the importance of where we are in this moment and the shift you're seeing in generational leadership across this country with Zohran Mamdani getting elected mayor in New York, and the retirements that are happening in Congress, and a lot of these members of Congress saying it's up to the next generation. We have to have something new, something different ideas, bold ideas to try to solve these challenges. We tried, we couldn't do it, now it's on them. And I feel like if there was ever a moment for me to step up and do that, it is now, because I've done this before, and I think in this moment I'm the right candidate to do it again.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit, because there is, I think, a divide in politics about when is too old to be. Sorry, I think I'm trending on the older side of things. But when is too old to hold public office? I think that you see a lot of millennials and Gen Zers saying, "Hey, it's time to allow a new, fresh set of leadership into the Democratic Party, except that the people at the top will not leave." So what's your view on that?
I mean, I view this as I mean, when I ran, I was 25 years old when I started my campaign for the state assembly. I'd never run for anything in my entire life. Now, I had the fortune of growing up around my father, who was a state legislator. He was the first Latino lawyer ever elected to the state Senate. Only person in the history of the state to be majority leader of both the state Senate and the state assembly. So I learned the value of public service at a very early age. And when I had decided that I was going to do this, it really was centered around, look, I don't need to be the one calling all the shots. I don't need to be the one making all the decisions and getting all the attention. But I believe that I have a perspective that is important, because Sacramento was constantly making decisions that were going to make things challenging down the line. They were going to throw costs and they were going to throw challenges onto the next generation. And I thought it was important that my generation be there to at least express how that maybe wouldn't be a good thing to do, and maybe we should work a little bit harder to mitigate some of these challenges. And so I think what you're just seeing right now is we've been so stuck in our politics of a lot of promises being made and no promises being kept. And especially for Democrats, you know, you could go out on the street and say, hey, this is what we believe as Democrats and this is who we are. But I think a lot of responses you'll get from people is, yeah, but do you have the courage to actually do any of it? And and when I take a look at why there's this generational shift in leadership happening, why you're seeing the baton of leadership being passed to the next generation, it is because people are so hungry for them to finally be the main character in our story. Mm-hmm. And what has happened is we have politics where the politician has convinced themselves that they're the main character in our story. And that's the problem, that's the challenge. It's, you know, we've done this, you know, budget allocation, or we've passed this bill, here's the press release, here's the social media post, yay, and then no follow through. And I think that people are just sick and tired of that, because it's, what are you going to do to materially make my life easier to live? What are you going to do to make it so that I believe that not only do I have a future in this state, but my family has a future in this state? The whole impetus as to why I even considered running for governor was because I asked myself and my wife, do we believe that our kids have a future in this state, and that one day they're not going to come to us and say, Mom, Dad, as much as I love you guys, as much as I want to stay in this state, if I want to move out of your house, which we want that one day too, if I want to own my own home, or I want to start a family, I'm going to have to leave California in order to do it. That terrifies me, and that's a failure of leadership that we cannot continue to accept.
So let's dig into that a little bit. What do you think are the top issues that Democrats talk about broadly, but have not yet delivered in California, that are important to millennial families, to Gen Z, to people who might want to move here, and people who cannot afford to stay here?
Well, I'll tell you what my top 3 priorities are, and this is what I think that California needs to focus on. It needs to be on housing, it needs to be on affordability, it needs to be on accountability. On housing, 10 years ago, I'm not joking, 10 years ago, as the young guy everybody was looking down their nose at, I authored legislation that says, you know what? I don't think it's fair that Blackstone just went and got $450 million worth of loans, and they're now competing against first-time home buyers in California and pricing us out of our homes and pricing us out of our communities. We should stop that. And the Democratic legislature, my Democratic colleagues said, no, Ian, that's not important right now. That's not important right now. So I said, okay, well, let's just track it. Maybe, why don't we, you know, you don't think it's a problem. I think it's a pretty significant problem, because not only are they pricing you out of actually home ownership, what they are doing is they're taking your rents, they're bundling it together, and they're selling it as a security on the stock market. So you're their investment. So they want you to stay a renter, so let's just track it. No, that's not important either, Ian. Okay. And so what I want to do is I want to make sure that we stop foreign and corporate investors from buying our homes and pricing us out of our communities. We have told entire generations of Californians that home ownership isn't for them. They have told my generation home ownership isn't for me. The average age of a first-time home buyer is 40 years old. 55% of Californians are actually homeowners. The median price home is $800,000, twice the national average. And in order to afford that median priced home, you have to be making over $235,000. So we don't have a pathway to home ownership. The only way our generation and future generations are able to actually buy a house is if their parents help them with the down payment to actually get into a home, because that down payment is a huge barrier. So we have to provide a refundable tax credit so that you can get access to, I'd say, what I'm gonna do is $1,200 every single year, so you can use that to save for a down payment. We have to provide incentives so that we can actually get first-time home buyers into a home. Right now, I'll never forget, I went to the California Association of Realtors and I said, why should I care about Proposition 13 when I think it's keeping me out of buying a home? And we talked about it, and I learned how it was something that we use to be able to keep teachers and public servants and firefighters in their home, and okay, I understand that, and that is something that we should protect. But now, as I sit as a candidate for governor, I see so many generations that don't have access to a real pathway to home ownership. Well, if I'm looking to buy a home, and that's a Proposition 13 protected home, why not extend those benefits to me? Why not allow me to benefit from that so that I can actually lower the barrier to getting into a home and having a payment that I can afford. And homeowners, right now, homeowners in the state have access to a $7,000 property tax exemption credit. It has been $7,000 since 1978. If it had kept up with inflation, it would be $70,000. So we're gonna keep it up, and we're gonna raise it to $70,000. And how are we gonna pay for that? Remember I talked about my friends that are buying up our homes and pricing us out of home ownership? We're gonna charge them large fees to buy any of our homes, and all the homes that they exist, they're gonna be charged an annual fee, and it's gonna fund us being able to buy homes and us being able to keep our families and our seniors in their homes.
All right. And so a lot of what you said right now is about existing housing stock. What do we need to do if you were governor? What would you do to encourage the creation of more housing stock so that California is not a net out-migration state?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think there's a couple of ways I want to talk about this, but I think that California is very coastally concentrated. Very coastally concentrated. I've been traveling all over this state to a lot of different communities. I've been spending a lot of time in the Central Valley. And I was talking to the mayor of Manteca, and the mayor of Manteca, interesting, he was saying, Ian, we can build homes here and we can sell them for $400,000, but we don't have any jobs for anybody to actually afford to buy these homes. What we need is investment so that we drive industry out to our communities so that people can not only have a job here, but they can actually buy a home. And I think that because we focus so much of our investment in coastal California, we've really cut ourselves off and sequestered important parts of the state that I think are going to be a really big part of the renewal of our future and how we solve a lot of these challenges. We've only built on 6%. 6% of the overall land mass in California has been developed. And so the state needs to, A, stop doing one-size-fits-all policies so that every region has to play by the same rules, because the same rules do not exist up and down the state. What works in San Francisco or in LA or in San Diego is not going to work in these small communities in the Central Valley. We have to have regionalized, specific policies and pots of money to help drive investment in these communities so we can drive jobs there, and then we can build communities and people can actually afford to buy a home and continue to have a future and live in the state. And we have to remove the barriers. I will go on record and say that I think the next governor of California has to have the courage to declare a state of emergency on housing and put in place emergency regulations to jumpstart development and construction of housing in this state. But it cannot stop there. You have to codify those policies in law long term so that we don't end up back in this situation that we're in today.
Great. Now, I want to ask a question about what it means for there to be, we have a jungle primary system in California. Jungle primary, it's just top two, irrespective of what your party affiliation is. And the idea that there is a possibility, because the Democratic field is so split, there are so many candidates, that we may wind up in a situation where the top two are two Republicans. And no, it's a possibility. It is a possibility. I think they're tracking right now, it's about a 12% possibility, but that's not a zero possibility. So I want to ask you, many of the people in the state of California are not familiar with Ian Calderon. Some of them may be introduced to you for the first time today. What do you say to people who are concerned about a vote for you is potentially a vote for two Republicans getting past the primary?
I just take a look at the undecided voters. You got 30+% of the voters in the state that are undecided. When you actually look at the numbers, I just don't believe that we're going to end up with two Republicans in the general election. But what I will say is, am I the candidate that you should be looking at as a result of that, or should you be talking to some of these other candidates that are starting to hit a ceiling and aren't showing that they can galvanize that support? And I can work through my challenges of being able to create more visibility. I will tell you, I've stayed very consistent in that 1% to 3% range. But my challenge is access to resources and visibility, which is something that could could literally change within a day with the right backing and support, which is what we're continuing to work on. But if the candidates are seeing, or if the electorate are seeing the candidates now, and they're choosing, that's not the future that I want, or these aren't the candidates that are moving me to actually want to make a decision, I'm continuing to stay undecided, I think the onus is more on them, because as this race goes on and there's a ceiling that these candidates can't break through, what's going to happen? You're going to start looking for somebody else who represents me, who's going to actually focus on the things that are most important to me and represent my values. And I believe that, and I believe this from the very beginning, that it isn't going to be money that decided this race. If that's the case, then why should any of us be in here? Because nobody's going to have more money than Tom Steyer. I like Tom. It's not a dig at Tom, but I'm just saying that, if that's the case, then why are we all trying? And money isn't being the deciding factor. There's been a lot of money that's been spent in this race, and the people that have spent that money have gone absolutely nowhere up in the polls. And you're seeing a consistent decline in these top tier candidates that are going down in the polls. They're not going up in the polls. And so I think what's going to matter, just like what happened in New York, is going to happen in California. It's not an impossibility. It's actually, I think, more likely than people are willing to accept, even in a state like California, where you have an electorate that is hungry for something new and something different and a generational shift in leadership, that somebody who isn't considered viable now will very much so become viable as it gets closer. And when people really start paying attention to this election, they really start evaluating candidates, it's going to come down to the candidate, it's going to come down to the message, and who they truly believe is going to deliver on what they're saying, who has the capacity to do it. And so for me, it's just waiting for my moment.
Well, thank you for these 15 minutes of moment with you, Ian. Thank you so much for coming back. All right.